Surprise Comics.
In this video, we're going to take a look at my top 8 picks for comics to start a collection. You could also argue that these are 8 comics that belong in everyone's collection. And this video stems from me recently branching out into a new area of collecting in graded coins, which, by the way, if you have any graded coins that you're interested in selling, I may be interested, so feel free to reach out to me, contact info down below. But I've been looking for resources of people that know coins like the back of their hand to point me in the right direction. What are some things I want to avoid? What are coins that I should start out with? And that's why I decided to do this video, is because I know comics like the back of my hand. I can give you a blueprint for the rest of my life of comics that I'm going to target. I know where to buy them. I know how to figure out what's a good price to buy them. I know tricks of the trade to get instant equity in comic books. And that's why I'm doing videos like this, is because that's where my knowledge is. And I want to provide that as a resource to others that are just starting out with comics, or there's just good helpful information throughout this, even if you're a seasoned collector. So every book on this list is a book that when it comes through my shop, it instantly sells. I mean, it's on the website for less than 24 hours. I typically price things, a little bit below FMV. So if they're desirable books, they usually sell right away. Make sure to use code COLLECT10 at brycecomics.com. You get 10% off all in-stock items. And if you sign up for the newsletter over there, you're also entered to win a free slab each and every month. And that's where you get first access to new collections that usually go pretty quick. So it pays to be signed up for that newsletter. We also do a monthly giveaway here on the YouTube channel. If information like this is helpful for you, consider hitting subscribe, and it will enter you to win a free slab each and every month if you subscribe to the channel, comment on this video, and like this video. Also, I have some exciting shows planned over on Whatnot, so use that link down in the description to get $15 towards your first purchase if you're new to Whatnot. I always have items in the Buy It Now for $15, so you can stop by and pick up a free book if it's your first time, and you can go bookmark the shows. I have an awesome Silver Age raw book show and some slab shows with $1 starts, chance at $500 in cash. Always a ton of awesome stuff going on over on Whatnot. In this video, we're going to be talking a lot about graded comic books, and the reason that I recommend graded comic books for new collectors is that you know what you're going to get. There are a lot of people in this hobby. There's a lot of dealers, there's a lot of other collectors that really try to take advantage of people and oversell raw books and under-describe them and overprice them, and you can really get screwed over, especially for some of these really expensive books, if you're not a seasoned collector. So that's the benefit of going with a certified company, is that you're taking out the guesswork of what it is. You know what you're going to get. So I recommend graded comics. I recommend CGC as the grading company. They're the most liquid. I'm always thinking about resale value and things like that. As you become a more seasoned collector, you may have a different preference. You may prefer a different grading company. You may prefer raw books, but at least you know why and you know what you're doing. If you're just getting started, you want to mitigate any possibility of getting screwed over, and graded comics provide an excellent opportunity for that. We're going to start the list off with SpiderMan #1 from 1990. The classic Todd McFarlane cover, one of the most iconic comic book covers of all time. And here we are on Key Collector, one of the tools that I use to determine the key significance of comic books. It also categorizes comics in a way that makes it really easy to navigate, all the different variants and stuff. So if we click here, we can see there's 18 different variants. There's actually a few more than that, but this will give us a good idea. We have the Polybag Newsstand Edition. We have the gold scarce second print that has the UPC code in the corner. That means it's a newsstand edition. We have the silver edition, the gold edition that's just the regular second print, and the platinum edition, which is the big daddy of this book. Incredibly hard to find because collectors covet them so much they rarely come up for sale. The second tool that I use to determine what is a good price to pay for comics is gpanalysis.com, which collects real-time data for what the comics are actually selling for. I think that's the best way to determine what your comics are worth and what you should pay, is to see what they're selling for, not what they're listed for, not what some other website says is the fair market value. Look at the actual sales and determine for yourself what you should pay. So the 9.8 here for cover A is $90. The gold edition is $175. Now, why would the gold edition be about twice as expensive as the cover A? Little tip right here, if you click this button, is actually a hyperlink that says census, and it will take you to the CGC census for that book. Now, you need to have at least the free account for CGC in order to have access to this. I have other videos about how much CGC charges for grading and other helpful videos about CGC, but if you get just the free account, you can have access to the census, which is incredibly important when you're trying to figure out how much to pay for a comic, how much, maybe whether or not you even want to collect it, if it's rare or not. But this is one of those books that it doesn't matter how rare it is, how plentiful it is. It's such a cool cover. It's worth owning no matter what. So here we can see that cover A has 11,000 total copies on the census, 7,300 of which are 9.8s, and the gold edition has 6,000 total copies and 3,400 of which are 9.8. So about half of the second print gold editions compared to the first edition, and the price is about twice as much. Interesting how that works. Supply and demand plays itself out in numbers in almost an eerie way. It's so accurate, and I mean, people aren't really putting thought into this. It's about how much more rare it is. It's just how much is it selling for right now, and it just lines up perfectly with the numbers. And here you can see the platinum edition selling for $5,700 most recently. This is a book that is just so highly coveted and so rarely comes up for sale that it consistently pushes those high numbers. Next on the list, we have Marvel Superhero Secret Wars number 8. This is the origin of the black symbiote costume that later bonds with Eddie Brock to become Venom. And it's got this classic cover by Mike Zeck. Just incredible artwork. Everyone who sees this cover wants it. Every time it comes into my shop and I post it on the site, it's gone within a day. Don't forget to check out brycecomics.com. Check out all these awesome slabs that we have in stock right now. Use code COLLECT10 for 10% off. We go through inventory really quickly here on the site, so stuff usually doesn't last long. I usually price it price to move. So sign up for the newsletter and you'll get first access to new collections and new inventory when it arrives at brycecomics.com. So if we go over here to GP analysis, we can see that the 9.8 most recent sale was $690. And we look at this graph, this is actually a relatively stable graph compared to other books in the same era of this same time frame. Most of them have come down drastically since these peaks in 2021, but this book has stayed relatively stable, and that speaks to the desirability of this book. Even though it is plentiful, even though there are tons of copies of it, it consistently posts decent sales numbers because so many people want it. And if we look over here at the CGC census, we can see that there's 6,000 total 9.8s compared to 25,000 total copies on the census. So if you want that investment grade, you typically want to stay within the top 10% of graded copies. So that absolutely is going to be the 9.8 if you want that investment grade. But if you want just a lower presenting copy, if you don't really care about the investment grade, you can still pick up a really well presenting, nice copy in the 9.2 range for $208. And if, that's a hefty discount if grade isn't as important to you. There's a lot better and entry points for this book. The 9.0 last sale was $210, so you may as well pick up a 9.2 if you can get one for about the same price as a 9.0. Next on the list, we have Amazing Spider-Man 252. This is the first appearance of Spider-Man's black costume. It actually ties with Marvel Team Up number 141, and it's a cover homage to Amazing Fantasy 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man. And this is another book that every single time it hits the shop, it's gone instantly, and every single new collector that comes into the hobby, with very few exceptions, sees this cover and wants to add it to their collection, myself included. This is one of the first books that I ever bought as a collector. And if we look at GP analysis, we can see that the 9.8 is selling for $1,425. And if we look at the census, there's 1,900 9.8s compared to 20,000 total copies on the census. Now, this is a really interesting phenomenon here because this book, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars number 8, is around the same era, and there's just way more copies of it at the 9.8. Secret Wars 8 has 6,000 9.8s compared to 1,900 9.8s for Amazing Spider-Man 252. And the reason for this is that Secret Wars number 8 was a story arc that was heavily speculated on. Comic book shops bought every single issue in this 12-issue limited series by the box, sometimes by the pallet. Almost every warehouse find has a box of Secret Wars books. So a lot of these books made it uncirculated, and it resulted in a lot more 9.8s on the census. But Amazing Spider-Man 252, while it's still a very popular title and was heavily ordered by most shops. It wasn't ordered necessarily by the palette because it was a story arc that was heavily solicited. So this is one that kind of came more hot as time went on, and so the distribution models resulted in less 9.8s making it onto the census. And that's directly reflected in the prices. 9.8s are way more expensive for this than Secret Wars 8. $1,425 was the last sale for the 9.8. And if you're looking for that investment grade, you're going to want to stick with the 9.8 for this. Possibly an argument can be made that the 9.6 is an investment grade. The 9.6 is still going to cost you a pretty penny at $460. But if grade isn't too important to you and you're okay with just a well-presenting 9.2 or better would be my recommendation on this. You can pick up a 9.2 for around $250. Next, we have Incredible Hulk number 340, and this book is simply an iconic cover by Todd McFarlane. That's the only thing that this book has going for it, and that is enough. This book has been cover swiped so many times, and once again, every single time it hits the shop, it sells immediately, and most collectors that come into the hobby see this and absolutely need to add it to their collection. And if you look at the census, there are 1,260 total copies at 9.8 compared to 11,358 total copies on the census. So if you want that investment grade, you're going to want to stick with the 9.8. If we go over to GP analysis, we can see that the 9.8 most recently sold for almost $1,600. And if we look at the graph for this one as well, relative stability compared to other books of this era in this time frame. It's just the same exact story, such an incredibly iconic cover, so highly coveted that it consistently posts good sales numbers. But you can always go for a lower grade copy, a 9.2 coming in at $175 for a drastic cost savings if you're not too concerned about getting that 9.8. Next on the list, we have another iconic cover art by Todd McFarlane in Batman number 423. This is a book that has a really cool story behind it. He was short on time and wanted to avoid all of the details that the human body usually takes to draw, so he came up with this oversized cape with a lot of straight lines, and the result was one of the most iconic comic book covers of all times. And if you look at this cover, there's a couple other things that Todd has pointed out. This part of the moon is not colored in, it's supposed to be yellow. It's not an error. All of them are printed like this. And this part of the moon is actually white. It's supposed to be yellow. So this cover was rushed. It was rushed through, and I think that totally adds to the cool factor. I've seen a signature series copy of this. Somebody got Todd McFarlane to do a remark where he colored the moon in here and he colored it in here and then signed it. And so it's one of the only full moon copies in the world. I think that is one of the coolest remarks I've ever seen. But this book was not heavily speculated on when it was solicited and when shops ordered it, which is reflected here in the census. Only 329.8s compared to 4,000 total on the census. So you could get a 9.6 and still technically be in that investment grade. A 9.8 going for $2,000. And you can see that the most recent sale for the 9.6 still coming in at $840. However, you can get a really nice presenting 9.2 for around $240 today, which I think is a great entry point for this book. Next on the list, we have Wolverine number 1, another iconic cover, the first solo Wolverine title, the first cameo appearance of Yukio, the first use of the phrase, "I'm the best there is at what I do." This book is actually on the hot list when I'm filming this video, February 10th, 2023. And if we look at the sales for this book, the 9.8 most recent sales, $640. And a similar story for this one, it has come down significantly in price from the market boom of 2021. But this is a book that I think 10 years from now, we will see it priced significantly more than it is today. $640 for a 9.8, 9.6 is $278. If we look at the census, there is 4,709 total 9.8s. This is another book that was heavily speculated on by comic book shops because it was the first solo title for Wolverine, such an iconic cover. It was ordered and a lot of copies didn't get distributed, and therefore a lot of 9.8s made it on the census. 24,000 total copies on the census. But again, this is one of those books, it doesn't matter how many copies are on the census. When new collectors come into the hobby and they see this cover, they want to add it to their collection. Now we get into a couple more expensive books for the last two. I think both of these are great goal books for people, although this one in Amazing Spider-Man number 300 is actually a book that you can get in lower grades for a very reasonable price. This is the first full appearance of Venom. It's actually not the first full appearance of Venom, but we'll talk about that in another video. Iconic cover art by Todd McFarlane once again. And if we look at GP analysis to see the sales, the 9.8 last sale was $3,850. Taking a look at the census, the 9.8 has 1,700 total copies compared to 33,000 total copies on the census. Investment grade would be 9.6 or better, and here you can see the majority of books are landing in that 9.6, 9.4, 9.2. Now, this was a book that was heavily ordered by shops. Sometimes it was ordered by the box. Sometimes it was ordered by the pallet. I remember talking to a store owner that's been in the business for decades, and he said that he remembers a time when he couldn't sell a full box of ASM 300 for $100. He had boxes of this for sale for $100 per box with 150 copies in that box, uncirculated copies, and he could not sell those boxes for $100. It wasn't until later that Venom really took off with comic book fans and collectors. Then he hit the screens, and it's just become more and more popular as time goes on. Because this book has an all-black back cover and a relatively cheap cover material, it's really hard to get this book in a 9.8. And that's why there's so few 9.8s on the census relative to the total numbers on the census. Last but not least, I think this book is a great first grail book for any collector. Giant Size X-Men #1. This book has so much going for it. The first appearance of a new X-Men team, and also the first actual appearance of these characters: Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Thunderbird, the third appearance of Wolverine, an awesome cover by Wolverine, the first appearance of Ilyana Rasputin as a child who later becomes Magic. This is actually my favorite part of this book. I'm a huge fan of Magic. It's also the introduction of Krakoa, the living island, and the first use of the sound effect sninked, skinked, sninked, however you say that, associated with Wolverine's claws. Now, this book is expensive in pretty much any grade. There's a lot of copies of it on the census. 12,417 total copies on the census, only 231 of them making it to that 9.8. Now, this is where it gets really tricky about investment grade. When you get into these super high value books, it's not always the top 10% of grades that are the best investment. Sometimes the lower grade copies actually have a higher ROI than those higher grade copies. This really applies well to Silver Age books. In a lot of cases, I think if your sole purpose is investment, a lot of Silver Age books, or even this Giant Size X-Men, you might be better off buying, say, 5 copies of a 5.0 versus 1 copy of a 9.4 or a 9.6. Now, if you're a collector and you want to look at your investment all the time and you don't want to look at a 5.0 copy, you have to factor that in, and your enjoyment of looking at it has some value as well. So, but for strict number purposes, it's not always the best investment with these super high dollar books to go with the highest grade you can afford. Sometimes the lower grades have higher ROI. So there you have it, folks. My picks at the top 8 books to start a collection. Why not begin with the end in mind? Begin your collection by adding books to it that are easy to sell if you decide to move on, that make great trade bait to other dealers or collectors if you decide you want to trade up to a bigger book. All of the books on this list are great for those purposes. Thank you as always for sticking with me to the end of the video, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Bry's Comics.